Thank you, Nate and Rich, and I'll join them in welcoming everyone to the Heights for this conference. The topic this evening is education as transferring of a culture. And this is not, I have to say, it's not an original thought. I'm sure many people have had it. But personally, I first encountered it when reading some files in my office, and I found a letter written by a former headmaster, actually the first full-time headmaster at the Heights. I say full-time because, believe it or not, the first year of the Heights School, the headmaster was a part-time employee. He was a full-time psychologist with NIH and part-time headmaster. He was a very small school. But the first full-time headmaster was Dr. Bob Jackson. And in a letter to parents, he talked about how education was about transferring of a culture. So that's the first time that I encountered that concept, that I remember encountering it and thinking about it. And since then, realizing how true that is and how important it is to understand that as educators. And I'm going to talk about it more from the strategic point of view. Tomorrow, there'll be more presentations at a more tactical level. But strategically, when you think about education, I think the common definition of education is to lead out of ignorance. And that is true. At the same time, it has, I think, some fairly clear shortcomings. And one of the shortcomings, perhaps the most noticeable one, is that by thinking about education as leading out of ignorance, we can easily think of education as providing information, right? Because we tend to think of information as a solution to ignorance. If I have more data, then I know more. Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we have lost in information? T.S. Eliot. But we don't think about that. Right? Now we tend to think, man, the more info I can dump into my student's brain, the more they know. And we don't consider perhaps often enough that information could be an obstacle or a challenge to actually knowing and understanding. Also because the ignorance that we lead the students out of is for sure intellectual and academic at some level. But I would say that that is not the most important ignorance that we're battling. It's not so much intellectual ignorance, but it is moral ignorance, is spiritual ignorance, if you want, is what Saint Bonaventure talked about when he returned to the University of Paris after having been a teacher there, and then returned after much pastoral work and met with his colleagues, his former colleagues. And he reprimanded them because he noticed that having learned how to measure the world, they had forgotten how to measure themselves, right? They know how to measure the world. They have become more skillful about fixing things out there, but they have lost the sense of who they are and what matters most in life. And of course, when we think about that, we think about computer hackers who are extremely skillful, and yet you wouldn't say they're educated people, right? Or they're good people, because their skill is used for the detriment of the common good. So they may have a lot of information, they may have a lot of skill, but they're missing something that is much more fundamental, much more important, which is a sense of what the point of their existence is. And what is the point of their professional work? What is the point of their skill? So today, certainly, we all, as educators, encounter this intellectual ignorance, math, writing, history, physics, Latin, poetry. We encounter all that. And some of us who've been around for years may even notice that post-COVID, there is a downshifting of knowledge that the students come in with. But But I think for us to consider this evening and this next couple of days, yes, we do have to face that ignorance. But we need to do more than that. John Paul II said, the trouble today is that men don't know who they are or what they're here for. And I think that's a really insightful, important comment, right? The point today is not so much out there, right? It's not world politics. It's not even national politics. It's not the economy. It's not the environment. The problem today is that men don't know who they are, and men don't know what they're here for. And if you don't know who you are or what you're here for, you're invariably going to live a much more anxious, stressed life. No wonder that anxiety and stress is going through the roof. 20, 30 years ago, I never thought of asking a high school boy whether he was anxious or whether he was stressed. 30 years ago, if I were to ask that question of a high school boy, I would get a blank stare because they wouldn't know what that meant, right? I could only ask him, are you hungry, right? Are you tired? Do you hate class? I mean, questions that they have an emotional response to that they can recognize, right? Are you anxious? I don't know what that means. 30 years ago. Now it's a much more common topic where they themselves bring it up. Now, some of it may be that the vocabulary is out there and they pick it up and they use it, and maybe it doesn't quite fully describe their feelings. But I think it's also true that they live more anxious lives than high school students did 30 years ago. If you don't know where you're going, you are going to be stressed. There's the famous story of the Supreme Court Justice Holmes, who was brilliant and very absent-minded. And one time, apparently, according to the story, he was in the train, and the conductor, the ticket checker, was coming down the car, and he saw Justice Holmes at the end of the car and going through his wallet, getting a little panicky, going through his pockets, getting more panicky, going through the briefcase, all his papers, right? Very anxious. And when the conductor got there, he told him, laughing like, Justice Holmes, I know who you are. Everyone knows who you are. It's okay. Like, you don't need to produce the ticket. To which Justice Holmes apparently said, no, you don't understand. I don't know where I'm going. I need the ticket, right? That's being absent-minded, right? It's like, you may trust me, but I don't know where I'm supposed to get off. It is so true. Like, if you don't know where you're going, you are going to have a very anxious journey. Like, you don't know what even the point of the trip is or where you're supposed to get off or what turns to take. So that is the question, right, that our students are facing. Who am I? What am I here for? Because of that, education as transferring a culture is not only necessary or a description of what education is, but is the right kind of education that we need so that our students can not only know how the world works, not only learn how to measure the world, but more importantly, learn how to measure themselves. And you can only measure yourself if you have a standard upon which you're measuring. So culture, the most common definitions of culture, the customs, arts, social institutions, and achievements of a particular nation, people, or other social group. The attitudes and behavior characteristic of a particular social group, right? Culture. Why we do what we do. What do we believe in, and how do we represent those beliefs in every facet of our lives, right? Culture. So we can talk about national culture, we talk about school culture. And when you look at your schools, I would say each one of our schools has its own culture. Schools that don't do well, I believe, are schools that don't have a clear culture. Are schools that are making decisions based on what they think others are going to like, or they try to imitate others all the time, but there's no clear sense of who you are. Just imagine running your family that way. Every decision is based on what the neighbors are doing and what you read in different articles or what you see on TV, without having a sense of who we are as a family. You end up being a very schizophrenic family, and therefore a family that is not going to drive, is not going to lead the children to any particular goal. So the transfer of a culture happens regardless of what we do in our schools and regardless of what parents do, right? Students are not like AI machines that would just take an input given to them. Students observe. Kids observe carefully. They judge. They imitate. They assimilate. They're subject to interactions with peers, with faculty, with family members, parents first and foremost, with the outside world. Students, all our students are acquiring a culture, an understanding of reality, of who they are. So the question is not whether they're going to acquire culture. The question is, what kind of culture will they acquire? And that's why it is important for our schools to have that culture and to transfer it. And that's why it's crucial that our schools have a culture that can be articulated, which means a mission and vision that can be articulated, and that is shared by the parents. Otherwise, we're in conflict with the parents. Right? We talk about the parents being the primary educators, and that is true, and we have to respect that. We come and help them to do that. But the only way we can do that effectively is if our cultures are in harmony. Churchill, I believe, is the one who said that we shape our buildings and our buildings shape us. And that is true, right? We know that from a school point of view, right? We can design a building, but once you have it and you inhabit it, the building begins to shape you, how you think about things. Right? One of the considerations when we build the main building here is that the chapel had to be the most beautiful space in the school. The reason for that is because it's the only permanent space. Like, I don't know what classrooms are going to look like in 50 years, or even a science lab is going to look like in 50 years, but I do know what a chapel is going to look like in 50 years or 1,000 years. So might as well invest in that one. And also because the other spaces, classrooms, labs, are where a faculty member faces the students. The chapel is where God himself faces the students. So it has to be the most beautiful place. We shape the chapel. We shape the building shapes us. It becomes part of the culture. That's something that we really care about because the students and the families can see that we devote a lot of time and attention to that space. G.K. Chesterton, in his usual fabulous way, said, "The state did not own men so entirely, even when it could send them to the stake, as it sometimes does now, where it can send them to the elementary school." Right? So true. Right? If the state wants to control people, control education, right? Provide an acculturation through education. What they read, what history they learn, what philosophy they learn. That is hugely impactful to develop that culture. We're very, very lucky, blessed here in our country that the state doesn't intervene nearly as much in education as it does in many other countries. The Congregation for Catholic Education, a few years ago in one of their publications said, "Teaching has an extraordinary moral depth and is one of man's most excellent and creative activities, for the teacher does not write on inanimate material, but on the very spirits of human beings." Right? Teaching is so important because as teachers, we're not writing on pieces of paper. We're actually writing on the minds and hearts and souls of our students. And because of that, we know that we're blessed and we have a huge responsibility. And we have to write the right script. And that's where culture comes in. So the question is, who will be transmitting the culture and what culture will be transmitted? Well, if we don't intervene, here what I think are the main cultural drivers in our society that all our students are affected by. And if we don't do anything about it, these are the drivers that I think are going to shape the way they view reality, that they view themselves. The most common one is relativism. The doctrine that knowledge, truth, and morality exist in relation to culture, society, or historical context and are not absolute. Truth is not absolute. Morality is not absolute. Right? None of that is absolute. It's totally dependent on the group, right? The society, the historical context. So how does this affect students? With most fundamental way in the moral judgments, right? Absent an objective truth, there's no objective right and wrong either, right? Students will often, will then say, well, the answer to that question depends, right? I have seen, even here at a place like the Heights, where we have families that are, most of them Catholic, not all of them, but all of them very intentional about the education of their children. And I can see, even from teaching seniors for the last 23 years, that they're much more affected by relativism now than they were 23 years ago, when it comes down to moral questions, right? And they're affected because how could they not? That's what they hear all around. And it's not only through news flashes, it's even the shows that you watch. I remember one time years ago watching a show, I forget which one it was probably 24, if you guys remember that, the one with Jack Bauer and, and then somebody said, like, I believe everything in that show except that you can go across LA 3 times in one 24-hour period. Every time I try, it takes me the whole day to get past LA once. Like, I never thought about that. Yeah, everything else I believe. It's just that is impossible. But in one of them, and I forget the circumstances, but there was a number of people that were going to die because of some biochemical release or something. And they were all given a cyanide pill because you're going to die anyhow, so might as well, chew on this and it'll be a more pleasant death. And that was just presented. Thinking, well, that's interesting because now that is presented as obviously the thing to do because you're going to die anyhow in a few hours, so might as well just die this way. That's a huge moral question. It's a very wrong moral approach. Never presented. Any kid who watches that show will come out thinking, wow, it's so good that they had those pills. Because that way those people didn't suffer as much when they died and they were going to die anyhow. So moral judgments are going to be under attack. In addition to moral judgments, relativism also undermines the student's perception of the good, and therefore what is worth living and dying for. I've been reading the Screwtape letters with the students for many years now, and in one of the letters, C.S. Lewis says that that the young are more willing to die than the old. And I asked him, do you guys think that this is right? Are you guys in class, 18-year-olds, are you more willing to die for the right reason that I would be at 60? And it leads to a great conversation. And, by the way, one of the comments I always make is, no, I think you're more ready to die, sir, because you're closer to it. Like, all right, that's getting a little bit too personal, I think, right? You don't have to go there right away. Regardless, I think the point is, I hope that the 18-year-olds are more ready to die for the right cause. Because I hope that they're so passionate that the idea of dying for the truth and the good and the beautiful is attractive to them. To be avoided if possible, but attractive to him if necessary. Dorothy Sayers says, in the world it is called tolerance, but in hell it is called despair. The sin that believes in nothing, cares for nothing, seeks to know nothing, interferes with nothing, enjoys nothing, hates nothing, finds purpose in nothing, lives for nothing, and remains alive because there is nothing for which it will die. Tolerance, despair. Relativism will inculcate that. There's no objective truth, there's no objective right or wrong, there's really nothing worth dying for. Survival is the norm. If that is the approach, that man will be willing to make any moral compromise to stay alive, because he will not see them as moral compromises. He will just see them as tactical moves in order to stay alive, which is the primary good in their minds. The second driver, I think, is Marxism. The political and social theory that believes that all struggle in the world is the struggle between classes or groups, Marxism. And it affects our students in that it appeals to the black and white view of the world that young people have. And it appeals to the desire to see all evil categorized in a group. They are the problem, the other team. Those guys are bad. That party is horrible, right? That nation is ought to be destroyed, right? All evil can be concentrated in particular groups, and if we just got rid of those groups, then everything would be perfect. We have all the truth, they have none of it. We're always right, they're always wrong. And this is being fed by social media and the echo chambers that social media creates, which they are much more part of than we are. And they don't have the perspective to understand that actually is an echo chamber as we do. The third driver is hedonism, right? The belief that pleasure is king and that I will be happy as long as I surround myself by the right pleasures, right? This one is very instinctive, right? It saps their energy. It preys on the teenager's tendency to be self-absorbed, right? I want what I want and I want it now. And it's going to create addictions. And it does create addictions, right? And this to be taken together with one challenge that all our students have as they get older, and the challenge that they have no rites of passage. That if you look at a 5-year-old going to school and a 22-year-old going to class, is the exact same external behavior. The body's bigger, the books are bigger maybe. Other than that, it's the same behavior. I put books in a book bag, I go to class, I go back home, I do homework, study. They have no rites of passage. There's no time when now they can drive the pickup truck to sell the hay in the town. Right? There is no one thing they can do that they feel better than they were last year because now I'm trusted more. The rites of passage, driving. I see that whenever a student begins to drive, wow, he walks differently. Right? There's that self-confidence. The liner hanging out the pocket. Like, oh, you got car keys? Oh, did you notice, sir? Yeah, I got car keys. Right, they lock in the car multiple times. So it beeps from the upper part of the parking lot. Beep, beep. Oh, just checking that it was locked. Like, yeah, I noticed you drove. Like, congratulations. Awesome. But it's a rite of passage. But other than that, the other rites of passage, drinking. Yeah, why wait till 21, right? I'm a sophomore now. I drink. I'm not like a little 8th grader, right? Or I'm a junior. I can drink. Smoking, weed, whatever it might be, right? Hedonism, together with the fact that there is no rite of passage, can lead to that kind of behavior. So those three drivers, relativism, Marxism, hedonism. And then I would add a postscript, P.S. 2 common negative reactions to these cultural attacks. P, pessimism. A cultural reaction that we can have as educators is to say, wow, things are so bad. Things are so bad, and they're not going to get any better. Right? They're just not going to get any better. Nationally, internationally, personally, like it just doesn't. You know, perhaps the rate at which they get worse will slow down here and there, but it's just not going to get any better. Pessimism. You hear it, you feel it among some people. And a corollary to that, which is separatism. If things are going to keep getting worse, I have to isolate myself and my family from the world because we have to protect the family against all evil. Schools, our schools, I don't think should be a bubble, right? Parents shouldn't bring students to schools to protect them, to put them in a bubble. That's not what the schools are for. Schools don't do well in that regard because that culture doesn't survive beyond itself. If the school is a bubble, when the student graduates, he's unprotected and he's not prepared. I think schools have to be filters. You do want to filter out a lot of the evil. But the main benefit of a school is not what you filter out, but it's how you cooperate with the parents to deal with the evil that comes in and the students experience personally. How to deal with that evil, that's where the school really is at its best. Because at that point, that student has a chance to experience evil and become more desirous of the good and better prepared to pursue that good. There have to be age-appropriate protections, right, for the students. I agree with that, and that's a great conversation as to what those are. So, obviously there are some. But the disposition has to be one of loving the world. Sometimes people in conversations I've had them, they refer to monastic living. They say, well, what about monks? Don't they hate the world because they set themselves apart from it? And I would say, on the contrary. What the monks are doing is that they love the world so much that they separate themselves from it so as to pray for the world all day long. Their mission is one of redemption. The form is a particular one, by separating from the world. Our mission, I'll talk about this, is also redemption. Our form is not by separating, but by being in the world, staying in the world. So the difference is that if we become a bubble, and the parents think of the school as a bubble, then they will be invariably scandalized when any evil comes in. How could it be that my child was exposed to this behavior? And the answer would be Adam. It's really Adam who did it. And when I find him, I'm going to tell him, right? If you hadn't committed original sin, little Johnny would not have done that. But I think Adam knows that. And he's atoned for it, right? And he's probably praying for little Johnny from where he is, from where he is now. So pessimism and separatism. So transferring the right culture. Okay, the right culture, an accurate interpretation of reality. Right? Culture has to be based in reality. Right? It can't just be an imagination. Reality, we all understand, includes both the natural and the supernatural reality. Most of the time, if not all the time, when we're pessimistic, it's because we're not seeing reality. It's because we're only seeing the natural aspect of reality. We're only looking at the deficiencies. But we're not looking at God's grace that encompasses all that and can make good out of bad. Reality is everything, natural and the supernatural. It's a concept that most people understand, for instance, in terms of sports. Like most people who are involved with the sports know that how a team performs transcends how good each player is. Because there's something intangible about the performance of a team. The psychological concept, how they feel about this, their mental toughness, all these intangibles that coaches talk about all the time. Oh, I like this player because of the intangible qualities. And if you ask a coach, what are those? Give some vague answers, but the point is, I don't know, but I know that he has them, right? That this person has those intangible qualities. Well, that same idea, but even much more importantly, expressed in reality because of the supernatural component of it, right? The outcome of our lives is going to be, if we view reality this way, including the supernatural, is going to be much greater than the sum of our actions may indicate, right? We try to do our best. The outcome, if we believe in this supernatural reality, will be much greater than our efforts could ever provide. So to transfer culture as an institution, we definitely need to have the right people, right? If we don't have the faculty, if as faculty members we don't believe in the culture of the school, in the mission, the vision of the school, then we're not going to be able to transfer it because it's not a program, it's the everyday common interactions that we all have with all the students. That's how the culture gets transferred. If we don't live it, if we don't believe it, then it's not going to happen. So we need the right people. But having the right people, I would say, is a necessary component of transferring the culture, but it's an insufficient component. What we also need is clarity as to what the fundamental principles of that culture are. And this is hard to do, right? Because we know culture when we see it. I mean, you know, turkey at Thanksgiving and fireworks at 4th of July and wearing green for St. Patrick's Day. Yeah, that's there. But if somebody told you, okay, what describes the culture of our country? Turkey. Well, it's more than that, right? And yet, if you ignore Thanksgiving, oh, that's so un-American. Like, we know there's a deficiency, but there's something more to it. So what are the principles that I think set aside the culture of a school? And they could be various. I'm going to propose two. And I know that these are the two that matter most here at the Heights. They're informed especially because of San Jose Maria Escriva's spirituality, and he's the, spiritual founder of the school. But I think they're applicable to every school that is Christ-oriented. The first fundamental principle is divine filiation. What do we mean by that? Well, let me start with a short story. This had to do with a former chaplain here at the Heights, Father Ron Gillis, who was coming back from a pro-life march downtown, and he was in the metro, and it's packed with people coming back from the march, and he's standing there, and the person he happens to be standing next to is another priest whom he hadn't met before. So they're talking where they're from. This priest was from Nova Scotia. What parish, that kind of conversation. And as they were talking, they noticed this fellow sitting on one of the handicapped seats facing them, right, facing the inside of the cart. And he looked homeless, maybe drunk, maybe high, maybe a combination of all three, right? And just standing there, staring at them, sitting on that handicapped seat. And at one point, the fellow makes eye contact with them and says, "Excuse me, fathers, what's Christianity all about?" Out of the mouth of babes and drunk, high, homeless people. I guess some of the, deepest questions come out. Now, excuse me, fathers, what is Christianity all about? And as Father Ron is trying to figure out, how do you answer this question to this person in a packed metro, the other priest, without missing a beat, says, Christianity is about the fact that God loves you. One sentence, summarized, right? So true. Divine filiation, the fact that God is my Father. It's a fact. It's not relative. It has nothing to do with how I feel about it. I may feel down, I may feel super happy, I may feel stressed. It does not change the fact. It's unchangeable that He's my Father. A relationship that is unbreakable. There are some relationships that we can break. I can stop being friends with somebody. There are others that you cannot break. You cannot unfather yourself. You cannot unmother yourself. You may have a bad relationship with your father, but you're always related to your father. I may have a bad relationship with God, but He will always be my Father. And the beautiful thing about that relationship is that His love doesn't change. That even when I think myself worthless, He loves me as worth His blood, which He shed for me as for everyone else. That's divine filiation. How does that influence our students? Not that we preach this to them, but that we believe it. If I believe that every one of my students is a child of God, that every one of my students is beloved by God, known by God from conception to the present, I have to treat him not just as a student. I have to treat him as a brother. I have to treat him as a little brother. I have to treat him in such a way that that student may feel his father's, God's love through my heart. How does it impact them? The way they're going to view the faith. Not as a list of things to check, but as a relationship to pursue, as a love story. Kid, the good news, your life is not an adventure. It's a love story. And the end will be really good. It will affect relationships with others. Right? Divine filiation is like corrective lenses that allow us to see others and the world around us as they really are, free from prejudices, misconceptions, misunderstandings. There's self-confidence, right? Students are always looking for a persona. Once they get into late middle school and high school, they're looking for a persona. They want to know who other people think they are. And the most typical personas they have are the athlete. And not just the athlete, the basketball player, the lacrosse player, the wrestler, the soccer player. And they want everyone to know, I'm a good baseball player. And if somebody were to say, you know, that good kid, that cuts deep. Because it's not just a comment, it's slash in my heart. Others is academic. I'm the good student. I'm the kind person. I'm the class clown. That's a tough one because it doesn't have a long runway, right? I'm a class clown. If we can convince them through how we treat them that the persona, first and foremost, is they're a child of God, the self-confidence they will have will be immeasurable, because then whatever else they do will not dictate how they feel about themselves. There will be things that they do better or worse, but will not define them. Joy, that's another manifestation of divine filiation. Right? Think about the martyrs, right? And one of the things I was always struck by reading lives of martyrs, especially down in the, back in the Roman Empire and so forth, is, people talking about, writers talk about how the martyrs would die with a smile. It must have driven the torturers crazy, right? Well, if they can die with a smile, certainly we should be able to live with a smile, right? If we have this sense of divine filiation, we will. It will affect their studies, because they will look at their studies and not as something they have to do, or at least the way we can present it to them is, listen, the universe is like a big mansion. And the owner of the mansion, God, has put you in it and said, This whole mansion, all the grounds, every single thing in this mansion is for you. And I have thought deeply about every single aspect of it, from the size of each room to the decoration in each room. And there are billions of gifts wrapped and hidden all over the mansion, just so that you may discover them sometime. Take care of the house. Study means investigating the mansion. What's the size? What does it look like? What's in it? What are the most important rooms? How do I think about it? What's its history? That's what we study. It's not something that we do to just get ahead. It's something that we do because it's been gifted to us. And we should try to get to know as much of it as possible. So that's the first fundamental principle, I think, this sense of divine filiation. And that, again, informs the way that we treat the students, how we teach them. The second one is that we are co-redemptors. So what does that mean? Well, it means that when Christ died on the cross, he didn't fix the whole universe. Right? He opened the gates of heaven, but the gates of hell remain open also. Right? I checked the scriptures, the creed, and I kept reading like, man, like that line is missing. Right? He opened the gates of heaven and closed the gates of hell. Oh, good. No. Right? The whole thing is not fixed. Is still affected, tainted. It's for us to help. What he did is he gave us the power through his grace to participate in fixing the world. I had a friend of mine many years ago who had this Ford Mustang that he bought used, and he was very proud of it because it was, fast car, and he was young and loved it. And it began to drain on him because I think he put half the miles of that car on his way to the shop and back. There was always something wrong with it, right? And he just couldn't get it fixed. Finally, he took it to a friend of his who was a mechanic up in Baltimore. And, the guy said, sure, I'll take a look at it. And, jacked it up. And then called my friend and say, here, come over, I got to show you something. He said, okay, when you look underneath, the undercarriage, the back of this car is a 1984 Mustang. The front is a 1983, right? I forget the exact dates, but there were 2 different years. These are 2 cars that got into a collision, one rear end, one front end, and somebody cut them in half and put them together, right? So you didn't buy one car, you bought 2 cars put into one. This thing is never going to work well. It's just not well put together, literally, right? It's always going to rattle. There's always something wrong with it. Like, well, that's a downer, right? He wasn't quite as proud. I mean, the paint job was very nice, though. I told him, well, at the very least, the paint job was nice, right? It made it look like one car. That's how I think about the world, right? It's getting in a car crash, maybe, so it rattles a little bit. It's out of joint. What the redemption did is it gave us the tools to fix the car and provides us with YouTube videos so that we can learn how to do everything that we need to do, right? Whatever we need to do. That's what being a co-redemptor means. How does that affect our students? Well, it's the view of professional work, right? They have to be professionally very competent. They have to be the best possible professionals, not just to make a living for their families, they should, but they have to be very professional, very competent professionals because they got to put the world back together. Right? They got to be experts with those tools. They got to be experts with those YouTube videos. Hopefully they'll be the ones producing some of those videos, helping other people to put the world back together. That's professional work. Studies is a preparation for that professional work. They have to understand the world. And they have to understand what the world is for so they can put it together in that way. There is, I think, a challenge that often Catholic Christian schools have, and this includes universities as well, I'm afraid, in that a lot of them don't believe that they can be professionally the best at top academic school and be truly Catholic or truly Christian. They don't believe that. They believe they have to compromise one or the other. right? Either we're going to emphasize Christianity and Catholicity and really care about the spiritual formation, and then we'll do some math on the side, or we're going to go all in, the college admissions plan, and then we got to downplay the Christianity and Catholicity because that, that kind of messes things up, right? And we want to get students who are here for the high grades, not necessarily for all this other stuff. And that is wrong, because the way I think that we ought to look at our schools, the culture of our schools, is that top academic achievement and spiritual growth are united, inseparable. One fuels the other. The reason that we need to be academically very competent is because we need to train our students, we need to motivate our students so that they can take over the world for the good. And if they don't do that, someone else will, but perhaps not for the good. And the reason that we have to have this clear mission is because when our students take over the world, they have to take over the world for the good. And that means they have to know what that is, recognize it, love it, and have the backbone to fight against the temptations to take the easy path. What is the role of a teacher? To conclude, well, to teach good content well, I guess we could say. That means to provide students with this view of reality that is fully real. Beyond that, to also equip them with the skill to continue expanding the correct view of reality and its understanding past their graduation, so that they become, lifelong learners. Not just that they read, I hope they do so, but that they want to learn more about reality as they grow older. Beyond that, to inspire our students with the passion to want to continue expanding their view and understanding of reality. Because this is my Father's mansion that He gifted to me, and I need to care for, and I need to explore and find those gifts. We, as teachers, our role then is to give them a powerful example of believing in divine filiation and our role as co-redemptors. And we can't fake it. All of us in education know that the cardinal sin of any teacher is to fake it, because students know it. They know when you're genuine. They know when you care, and they know when you don't. We need to have a permanent disposition to help each student as needed, with generosity. Look at a quotation from St. Augustine, where he talks about the love a catechist, a teacher, ought to have for his pupils. He says, "And since the same medicine is not to be applied to all, although to all the same love is due, so also love itself, as in travail with some, becomes weak with others, is at pains to edify some, dreads to be a cause of offense to others, stoops to some, before others stands with head erect, is gentle to some, and stern to others, an enemy to none, a mother to all." We know as educators that we never teach a class. We teach individuals who are together in a room, but always teaching individuals because every single student is different and needs equal love manifested in different, unique ways. So the goal for us as educators is to transfer the right culture to students and their families. Why is that the goal? Because our Father God has asked us for help by teaching, to be co-redemptors. And I would say the teaching profession, from this point of view, is one of the most important things anybody can do. I would put ministry ahead of it, priesthood, because there you are shaping the soul and bringing down benefits through the sacraments that no one else can. Second to that, I would put teaching. If we view teaching from this perspective, how are we going to do that? Through academic excellence. Right? We can't shortchange them in our classes. We cannot shortchange them in the interactions with them and how present we're in the hallways, but at the same time being spiritually vibrant. If we don't pray for our students every day, shame on us. If we don't go to a chapel nearby every day, shame on us. Right? If we don't go to our patron saint, I may go to Saint Josemaria and say, please, Father, do not let me impede your work in them. Do not let me be an obstacle. Let me be a conduit, right, of your love for your students. If we don't do that, shame on us. If we do that, then we're transferring the right culture. Thank you.